Hey there, and welcome to the A.D.K channel. I, of course, am Dave. With me today from the channel is Andy, and joining me, or joining us, we have James, or Jamie, and Matt from the wonderful Horrendous. Feels a little ironic saying that, wonderful Horrendous.
The oxymorons are upon us.
Exactly.
Hey, great punk band too.
So we have so Jamie and Matt, you're joining us. You're you're based in Philadelphia. So thank you for taking the time of your day. You've just had your new album drop today. Let me just bring up my notes. I did have it, and it's because I don't want to. I can't just even just spiel off the name of the album off the top of my head because it's not the easiest one to say. It's Ontological Mysterium. Is that correct?
Perfect.
Wow. Okay. We are going to break into that album because obviously that's a key topic considering it launched today or dropped today. But before we even get into that, I have to go back to. I always like to go to the beginning of the band, get a little background, a bit of history, and I have to be honest. I'm going to ask about the band name. I need to get this out of the way because when I look back at the band starting back in 2009. And listening to some of the earlier stuff that you guys put out, very much more of a traditional death metal style when you first started. And the name Horrendous, very much a traditional death metal band name, I guess. And I was a little surprised when it came across my desk and we were going to do the review, and I hadn't come across you. I know Andy had, but I hadn't. And I just thought, as soon as I heard the band name, I'm like, oh, God. Horrendous. Is this going to be... They're just basically telling me exactly what I'm going to be expecting here. And then I got it, and I listened to the new album, and I was like, are they being ironic now? Because this is not horrendous. This is not a horrendous music at all. This is great. This is a banging new album. So what was the reason for picking the name Horrendous?
I think it's a good question. It was long. We started playing together and we're trying to think of a name, and obviously had a much stronger, traditional death metal kind of thing going on at the time. And at the time there weren't a lot of bands doing that. And we were like, oh, we should have a name in that vein because that would be cool. And in like the span of a day, we just brainstormed some stuff and we're like, oh, no one's used Horrendous. Let's just do that. And of course you don't like envision still doing this in 15 years and like expanding musically and philosophically and everything. And it's just one of those things where like, that's just what we went with at the spur of the moment back in the day. And it just still sticks because it's too late to change now.
You've got that back catalogue now. You can't change it as the styles change.
Right. And I feel like this happens a lot with bands where like there's a punk band Propagandhi that we love, and like that's a name they made up when they were kids, and they like think it's dumb as shit now, but it's like it's too late now,
You're stuck with it. Were there any? Do you remember any of the other names that you were thinking about at the time, apart from Horrendous?
I was gonna say the thing that Jay left out is that our very first show was it wasn't really a proper show. It was like a battle of the bands that I actually signed us up for without telling anybody else in the band. And then I just came to practice one day and was like, hey, we have a show in 2 weeks, so we have to finish our songs and be ready to play them. But that first show that we played, we were actually called Fallacy with a PH. So that was, and like, it's something we knew we were never going to keep. It was like a joke, but that was, our first show was that, technically.
And we were playing the songs that are on our demo, but we didn't have a band name at the time when we were doing the show. So.
Okay.
How did you do in the competition? How did you get on in the band? Battle of the Bands.
I'm pretty sure we won. There wasn't really a proper voting thing, but
I think there was some kind of thing. So I know we got paid slightly more than other bands. It was probably like $80 versus like 20 or 40, but there was some kind of like voting somewhere, or maybe we just brought more people honestly to the show. It was probably that.
I think we were also one of the only bands that were asked back to play like a normal gig at that venue. So I think that means we won.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious looking back at your early days of 2009 and go up to your first album, The Chills, because if I think about like 2009 onwards, death metal wasn't a big trending genre at the time. So really, we were still in the kind of the metalcore. We were coming out the back end of that sort of stuff at the time, with the Killswitch Engages and stuff. Those sort of bands were very, very key at the time. So what attracted you guys going into the death metal genre?
I will say it was hard for us when we were just getting started to like get people to come watch us play, because what you're saying is right. It was like the peak of like Killswitch Engage type stuff, and we were in South Carolina at the time where we formed, and like that was like a metalcore. That's all anyone gave a shit about in terms of heavy music. So we're playing this like older school stuff, and like everyone's like, "What are these guys doing? Like, what is?" You could tell like seeing people's faces when we're playing. I don't know how we got into it per se, other than the fact that Damien was always really into this like old school, early '90s death metal. Like Matt and I were interested in some other kinds of metal, and when we got together with him, we just kind of mixed it all together, and it turned into what it was for that first demo and record.
I also, yeah, go for it, Joey.
There were a couple other bands at the time that were doing some kind of that thing, like Tribulation's early record, for example, was out, and we were like, "Oh, cool! We'll join this like small group of bands that are doing older style death metal, kind of bringing it back."
Okay.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it, David. Go for it.
Well, I was just going to kind of talk about the fact that obviously the Chills, and I was listening to again pronunciation Ekdisis, which was 2014's, and that again very much a traditional death metal. Although I did hear quite a bit of doom influences coming in there, like Cathedral and some of those sort of vibes coming into some parts of those tracks. I know they talk a lot about death metal has some doom in there, but I could actually hear it almost a little bit of planned separation about we're going to put a bit of a doom feel on some of those songs. But when we listen to something like 2018's Idol, you could hear a clear step forward in the progression and the progressive elements that were coming through. And I'm just wondering where that thought process of going from something like 2014's Ekdisis to the Idol album in 2018 and that period of time, and obviously there was an album in between, but the thought process of moving towards a progressive death metal, when did that decision come in? Was it a case of an actual plan, or was it a case of actually as you were learning new techniques, new skills, wanting to put them into use? I'd love to get an idea from you guys.
Yeah, I'd say it was a bit of both, actually. I think in one sense, like just as musicians, I think we always want to do something new and something different, and never kind of like repeat what we've already released, I think, and the ground that we've already covered. So I think some of the progression is just like a natural way to move forward and to kind of expand the boundaries of the music. But I also think it has a lot to do with us growing as listeners too. And I think from 2014 until now, like we've all just gotten into so many more kinds of music and different ways of expressions, and art even. And I think the music just kind of had to grow with us in a way, you know, even just like reading shit, you know, and like philosophical ideas. And I think the music, since it is so much a natural part of us, I think it had to have those things in it. It didn't feel right to not have those things in it. And I don't even think it was a conscious choice of sitting down and be like, we're going to become a progressive band, you know, it's just following our own instincts. That's kind of where they led.
Okay. Andy, you had some questions I know you spoke about.
Yeah. Evening, guys. Thanks for joining us. Contrary to what Dave said, I'm really sorry I haven't heard of you, but I have binged your back catalogue over the last couple of days because, again, bit of communications breakdown as to who's going to be involved in this. And like yourselves sharing the sort of media and the interviews, we do that as well. But I said I'd join Dave on this one because, as he said, I'm the death metal doom guy. And I started actually with the two singles that were available before today. I didn't realise he had a sort of advanced copy of the album, and I was like really impressed at how sort of, you know, my summary of it was like technical death metal, and in particular what jumped out at me was the song names and some of the lyrics and the sort of words that are quoted in the lyrics, or certainly on those singles that I listened to, because they always pique my interest. I go back and look stuff up and, you know, try and establish the meaning of words. So, can you sort of sort of just go into a little bit of some of the sort of lyrical themes you're using? It seems like sort of their sort of Greek myths are involved in there, and Enochian, for example, using the cult language. Where do you draw your lyrical themes from for your sort of more up to date material? Certainly.
Yeah, you can start with this one, then I'll add. I feel like you've been
I mean, I think
giving a lot of good answers for this one here.
I'll let Matt talk about most of this, just because he was the one that I think pulled in a lot of these references, like Enochian and things like that you're alluding to. I think there's a lot of wide inspiration for the lyrical content, and Matt, Daniel, and I all kind of share duties. We all have songs that we individually do, there's a lot of different themes on the album. I think, to me, a lot of the big themes are change and evolution and transformation and being, having the courage to do so. But I'll let Matt talk about some of the actual lyrical references and themes that he was digging into that might be a little more directly interesting.
Sure. So I think, I guess to start off, I am an English teacher, like a high school teacher. So I'm a big reader. And I think sometimes that alone makes these references and these allusions kind of find their way into the music. But to kind of piggyback off what Jay was saying, I think a lot of the goal, I think, for this band is, number one, making lyrics that we feel like match kind of the majesty and like the grandiosity of the music. And I think that's in some ways why like these mythologies find their way in. It's like drawing off of this gargantuan feeling of these myths and bringing those into the music to kind of match the emotional heights that I think we're reaching for here. But taking a step beyond that too, I think part of the band's mission really, the Chills is a different story, but once we left the Chills, of really singing about life. And I think most death metal bands don't do that. They sing about death, and we often get compared to death. And I think in some ways, like, that might be our biggest influence from them is of course, like, musically we're progressive, but I think lyrically we're singing about real things and we're draping them in imagery and metaphor and myth that isn't real, that is more of this like mythological world. But I think the whole point of that in my eyes is to bring more of a mythic scope to real life. And it's not something that you have to step out of life to experience. It's something that is happening in life all the time around us. And I think everyone's story is mythic in some ways, but just since there's billions of us walking around, it doesn't seem that way, And I think part of the mission for me for this record lyrically was trying to bring everybody back into that realization, like you are living a myth right now. And every choice that you make is adding to that story. And in line with what Jay was saying about kind of facing, transcendence, evolution, and facing the things that are in front of you and really daring to step into yourself, whatever that is, whatever that could be. And one thing I think we're all really proud of on this record is I think the music really reflects that as well. This like stepping into our own personalities a bit more. And we just feel like this sounds the most like horrendous of any of our records. Meaning that I think it's a record that only we could have made, and a record that from the vocals to the playing and the performances it's truly us on the album and not us kind of playing into the classic tropes that metal offers us. And I think vocally, particularly on this record, like we really stepped into that, where it's like there are some screams that one expects to hear on a death metal record, and those are there for sure, but there's also a hell of a lot more that isn't usually allowed, I think. And even our own voices, I think, have evolved into something that is pretty unique to us. And if not wholly unique to us, at least different from what most bands are doing right now, too.
Thank you very much for that. From the lead singles, I then went back to the Chills, and it's a departure, isn't it? Your sort of musical transition from that album up to date is amazing. I think we touched on it earlier, but when listening to the Chills, I noticed that it was, much more, faster tempo, definitely an old school vibe. And after, a few tracks, I was thinking there's a comparison with a vocalist. I don't know if it's yourself or Damien who is sort of like the main vocalist, but are you familiar with, you must be Pestilence, the sort of Dutch death metal band from back in the day? I thought have they got Martin van Drunen in the band? Because I was listening to your material before, sort of investing, sort of looking at your bio and the band history and everything. But there's a obvious comparison there, and it's a great album, and there's obviously the progression through to where we are now. I mean, we mentioned death. Dave's mentioned some doom as well. I mean, I picked up sort of, there's sort of Swan Song era Carcass and sort of Candlemass, early Candlemass. Are they fair comparisons, would you say?
Sure, I think so. Certainly Heartwork too, I would say. And overall, I for me anyway, I don't know if this rings true for everybody in the band. I'd say Jamie would agree with me, but honestly, a lot of even more of the classic stuff, like beyond pre-death metal, like Judas. I mean, I'm wearing a Judas Priest hat right now. Like, I think for us, it's more almost about capturing the spirit that those bands brought than it is necessarily the sound.
Oh, cool.
And of course, the sound is for sure in there, but I think we wanted this album to feel like a Judas Priest album or an Iron Maiden album, and capturing that spirit of like being 10 years old and hearing that stuff for the first time, and just my life was changed forever. I think there's this wildness and this bombasticness to those records that we wanted to bring here. And in a way, I would actually say those are kind of our biggest influences at the moment. Though, of course, like musically, the threads aren't necessarily a one-to-one comparison, but I think spiritually, for sure, that's kind of what we were aiming for here.
Last one from me, which is my sort of go-to question. Is there a song? I mean, you've got a raft of songs, 5 albums now. Is there one that you always goes down first on the set list? What is there a fan favorite that you always play or mostly play live for yourself or the fans? A song from your repertoire.
Yeah, I mean, we almost always play this song called "The Stranger," which is the opener on Ectasis, the second album. People just love that song, and like, we've had shows where we don't play it and we like get like yelled at for not playing it almost by people. Like we had a show when we were touring for Idol. We were in this place where like, all right, we're beyond playing that stuff, the old stuff. We'll play it when we want to. We don't have to. And like at the end of the show, the promoter after the last song ran on and was like, "Please play The Stranger for me." And we were like, "Oh my god, all right." So we played it. So like, we pretty much always play that song. And there's some other ones that we played almost every show too. That most of those other ones would be more like we feel like we pull them off really well live, and it's a nice live song kind of a thing. But The Stranger's the big one that we pretty much always have to play.
Yeah, I think that promoter's actual quote was, "It's like going to see Metallica, not hearing Enter Sandman," I think he said. Okay. They're like, "Oh man, all right, we got to do it." I agree with Jamie on The Stranger there. That seems to be the one that's like everyone is in agreement on. The others certainly come close, but I don't think it's quite to that level. I don't know why, honestly. I guess because it's the opening track on a record where like our sound kind of changed a bit. But I do really think with the release of this record that I can see a couple of the tracks on this album becoming songs like that are just kind of an expectation to hear. Like really, really looking forward to playing the closer of this record live. And I'm hoping that will be a crowd favorite as well. So I think it's just going to be fun as shit to play.
You're leading on from that. Have you got like an album launch show sort of coming up soon? Promotional tour?
Yeah, we actually did a tour about 3 weeks ago. That was a couple weeks long as like a pre-album promotional tour. We're gonna do some more probably toward the end of this year. We're working on those still, but those will get announced soon for sure.
All right, thanks for that. Over to you, Dave.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about on Ontological Mysterium. I have to keep looking on the screen just to make sure I say it correctly. So as I said before, I'd heard the album or anything like that. It came up, and I always, and I have to be honest, every time I see death metal bands and we've got to do a review or an interview, I almost go into them with an aspect of dread, because I don't feel it's not an area or a genre that I feel comfortable reviewing or discussing, because it's just not something I can add a lot of value to. And I was incredibly impressed by this album. So I was really surprised by the amount of melody that's actually in the album, because I was kind of expecting it all to just be kind of gruff vocals, blast beat kind of things going in there with maybe some djenting guitars being progressive style. I was thinking that's what it's going to be. Here we go. And actually there was groove in there, there was melody, there was elements of doom. It was just incredibly accessible for a progressive death metal album. And I actually remember listening to all the tracks and actually smiling listening to it, which is very odd to do to a progressive death metal album, to sit there smiling as you're listening. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm curious about, when you sat down to do this album, did you have an idea about what you wanted this album to be before you started, or was it a case that you just started writing songs and got to a point where you went, right, we're at an album sort of stage now and we're going to put the themes and everything together? Or did you have a plan beforehand? How did it all come together?
Thought Jay was going to jump on this one. No, actually, we really didn't. Interestingly enough, I think after Idol, we were kind of initially in this mindset of like more is more and bigger is better, which I think we did achieve in a different way. But because of that, pre-pandemic anyway, and really during the pandemic, I was only mostly seeing Jamie at that time. So we're brothers. And a lot of the songs that we had started and then continued with the band in the early stages were all like 10-minute long epics. And I think we just got to this point where we finished writing all of them and then kind of sat back and we're listening to them. We're like, this isn't it. This isn't what we want. And I remember particularly this one day where the title track of the current album was like 12 minutes or something. And we were sitting there and I don't know if it was me or somebody else, just stood up and was like, what if we just cut out this 7 minutes of the song and go right from this part straight to here? And like, that's it. And we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, yeah, like that would be so much fucking better, you know? Like, why are we like, what is the point of having all this stuff here if these are the two best parts of the song? Like, that's all it should be. And I think that kind of snapped us out of this spell of laboring so much over trying to make these monumental pieces. And to me, that was the turning point where we just started to think bigger, yet in smaller doses. And I think it became something so much more about like, not how much ground that we can cover in a single song, but how much ground can we cover as a whole on the record. And that just changed our approach to thinking about building entire songs off of one small theme and letting it kind of run its course. And if the song is 3 minutes, that's fine. I'm happy there's a 3-minute song. I'm happy we have songs that are under 2 minutes on the record, you know? And it just opened up so many doors of going in all of these different directions and yet maintaining this really cohesive picture and letting each song kind of use its own individual voice and personality to tell a part of the story, as opposed to like each song needs to have everything that the band has ever done in it, you know? And it just felt more free. It felt more fun. It felt less restrictive. And I think we kind of arrived at this wild place of freedom creatively, that now that this is released and everybody loves it, we're kind of like, oh, like now that everyone's giving us the green light on this, like God knows what we're going to do next. You know, it really feels like we can do anything at this point, which is a wonderful feeling.
I just want to add real quick too that Idol was a much like darker, more twisting, dense record, honestly, that I think for a lot of people it's hard to get into. Like, it demands a lot of listens from people. And we felt that after we made it and saw what people thought. And I think for this one, we wanted to make this more immediately fun and like immediately grabbing for the listener, where they would hear it and be like, oh, fuck, this is cool. Where, you know, that was another thing that as we're getting further into this process that Matt was talking about, it became clear to us, like, we have to make this record just fun as shit, like as much as we can, which is not something I think most death metal bands would probably say.
Yeah,
And
I would definitely say that I didn't find any wasted space on the album at all. There was no points where a riff or a particular passage of the song hung around for longer than it needed to. And we've talked about this when we've talked about songs before on other people's albums or on music videos we've listened to it, going, this just songs felt like they should have finished a bit earlier, or it was great. Or we listened to, I can't remember what band it was, Andy, we were talking about last week. We were like, it was about 7 minutes long, and I was like, there's a good 3-minute song in there somewhere. Yeah. If you take this bit, and put it all together, that would be a great song. But there's a whole load of filler there that we just don't need. And I actually found myself getting bored. But in your case, every single moment, you kept moving it on to another part or another passage at the right point, which is what I thoroughly enjoyed about the album. I mean, I have a question about your overall tracks. Is there any song that you guys have written that you can't, because obviously being progressive death metal, it can be quite technical, quite fast passage changes. Is there anything that you've written that you don't think you can pull off live?
No, I think some songs are tougher than others. And again, kind of going back to Idol, there were songs on there that it took us a long time to like get them into shape where we could play them live. But by this point, we've played them all live now. Like when we were first starting, when the record came out, it was like half the record we were just not ready to do. Like we would play them, it just did not translate. At this point, we've played probably close to half of this record live, and these kind of the tour I was telling you that was running up to release, and we feel good about all that. I think the rest of the songs we just need to work on a bit more, and they're going to get there too. Pretty confident that we'll be able to do it. Yeah.
I honestly think Neon Leviathan is going to be the hardest one. This is a lot of crazy riffing in that song. And I was going to say earlier, David, I forgot to mention this, but it actually makes me overjoyed to hear that you were smiling during the record, because I think that is something that is really unique to us, and I think that's what we want people to feel. We want people to actually feel something, and not just aggression, not just rage, not just darkness or something, you know. And if you were to ever see us live, hopefully we'll be around y'all someday. That is a huge aspect of the band that exists that anyone who hasn't seen us live just doesn't know. But it is much more of a celebration, I think, our music, especially in a live setting, than it is I don't know, some ritual or some like a moment to step into the dark. And I really love that this record communicates that in a way that certainly Idol did not, but kind of intentionally did not. But it just feels really authentic in that way, that it's completely true to the live experience, and really a reflection of our relationships, I think, as friends, as people, as musicians. So.
Well, I only have one question left, so before I go and ask that, I'm just going to check with Andy if he's got anything else that's come up that has suddenly popped into his head that he might want to ask before I go to the final question.
Amazingly, yes, there is, Dave. I mean, just following on what you were saying, Matt, regarding the light bulb moment you had, sort of perhaps in the rehearsal studios, about the song that you sort of cut down. Would you consider releasing that in its full entirety, in its original form, or any other songs that were in that format? I mean, that's an idea for the future, isn't it? Director's cut of the album, perhaps? Double disc?
The remixes. Honestly, no, solely because a lot of the parts that we cut, I think one day will probably become their own songs. I already have ideas for a bunch of those. So, one of the things I'll never forget, like being young and just reading about musicians that I really loved and looked up to. And I remember reading this thing Dave Mustaine had said about the first song, I guess the first like proper song on So Far So Good So What, Set the World on Fire, or Set the World on Fire. And I remember reading this interview where he was like, yeah, that riff existed before the first Megadeth record came out, and it just never was right. It like didn't fit into anything at the time, and here it is, you know. And I think we've taken that approach a lot, where there's stuff that we'll write and it kind of sits around for years because it's not ready yet, or the parts that are supposed to come after it, like, we couldn't have thought of at the time. And another great example of that is Preterition Hymn on the record. That riff has existed, I think, since 2016 or something like that, probably, Jay. And I remember Damien writing that, like, in our practice studio, like, long before Idol even was written. And it popped up again and just felt like the right moment to kind of release it. So no, probably not release the full 10 minute tracks, but we'll see.
Okay, so final question I always like to ask is, what is on the pad for the next 18 months? What does it look like for Horrendous?
We're definitely working on getting shows together. I think we're going to make a very strong effort to actually get to Europe this next year, which we had a one-off in Europe right before the pandemic, in the Netherlands. That's the only time we've ever been there to play, just the one show. So we're hoping to really do it this next spring, summer, or whatever, depending on what we can get into. And honestly, otherwise, like, we're probably going to start writing the next one, like, immediately. The next record, because we spend so long writing records, like, if we don't start now, it's going to be another 5 years or more till the next one comes out. Like, we'll probably write for like a full year to year and a half at least, something like that. So that's definitely want to get into that ASAP. and I mean, we're feeling inspired as well right now, so it's a good time to get going.
Excellent. Well, I just want to say a big thank you to Matt and Jamie for obviously spending some time with us today. It's your busy day because it's obviously the album launch day. So I'm sure you've got plenty of other people to speak to about on the press run. But yeah, great album. I suggest everyone gets out and checks out either on the Spotify's or Bandcamps or whatever else, other ways that you can possibly get it. Have you got physical copies of the album? Are you doing physical media?
Yeah, you can get them on our Bandcamp from us, or Season of Mist has merch sites in the US and Europe, for example, our label. So
buy the CD. Don't do the streaming thing because that's rubbish. They don't get any money. Buy the physical copies. That's what we suggest. But yeah, and also buy all their back catalogue. There you go. Very important. But just a big thank you for obviously speaking to us today. And yeah, all the best. And hopefully we'll see you over in Europe and in the UK sometime in the future.
Yes, hopefully.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us, y'all.